You're feeling the cold, Andy.
You're on mute, Andy, and are you still in NZ?
No, and it's preventative maintenance.
Right.
Given I read that Sam Neill died of pneumonia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Not really
Guess
heard
that
so.
happens when you get old.
Yeah, I thought he had some sort of blood cancer.
He did, but he came out the other end of it. But I think the chemo and everything else knocked him around a bit, so his immune system wasn't all that it could be.
Yeah, I get that.
There was a cast of thousands coming in. I don't know if you know this, David, but when you load the eRequesting workgroup page, do you see a Zoom link described to the TDG?
No.
I'll show you what I
think
see.
so.
I don't know why this is, unless I've done something bizarre, but let me show you what I see. Oh. I don't know why. I don't know if it happened. I don't know if that was what was there before, but I only noticed it when I was looking at it.
Okay. That might have been operator error. I'll look into that.
I think it's
copy paste error.
Is it?
We need to fix that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Agenda of items.
I went back through a few and went, So I think it might have come from the original TDG. I don't know if it's been there all the time and I've ignored it, but I just happened to notice it.
Okay.
All right. I am expecting Angus. I was talking to him yesterday. Oh, speak of the devil. All right, 5 past. We can probably make a start. Start with acknowledgement of country. Let's begin our meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians, land in which we meet. It's all over the place, but for me, it's the Turrbal and Yagara people. So acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay respects to any elders past and present. Today, Michael.
Will you be sharing your screen at all?
Yeah, thinking of it. Do you want to share yours? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, yeah, I was planning to do that. Just let me coordinate myself. There. Did I make you happy? You can lower your hand now. Thank you. So let's look at the agenda for today. Agenda today, is to continue, they have a trick, is to continue the discussion around specimen, and we'll talk about what a specimen might look like given the choice we made last week around the two options that we were looking to support. I've got a brief update on bundles based on the feedback that Michael provided last week. And if there is time, we will start talking about transfer of fulfillment, also known as claiming, also known as patient choice, also known as whatever else it's going to be called. Does anyone else have any additional things that they would like to add to the agenda? Nope. Oh, and Vince. Good timing. Okay, so we'll just go back to the minutes from 2 weeks ago. That's where we went through the specimen discussion. We talked about the modifications we were making to the bundle and a few other things. Has anyone had a chance to look at the minutes?
Yep, I read them. I think they were fine, Andy.
Excellent. Good job, David. So you're happy to propose we pass those minutes?
Yep.
Do I have a seconder?
Before we do that, can I just ask that the participants get added as an offline job? Can you scroll up? Oh no, they're all there. Sorry, I was looking at attendees on in the middle column. That's all good. Thank you. Sorry.
You're right. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Jai.
Jai, thank you. All right. Does anyone wish to vote negative on accepting the minutes from last time we met? Does anyone wish to abstain? Raise your hand. 1, 2. No more? 3. Okay, counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. 4. Counting down. Oh, 3. 4. Okay, I'm counting down now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's take it. So 16 affirmative, well, 15 not counting me, and 4 abstain. Right. Oh, hand up. Adrian? Is your hand still up?
Yes, apologies.
Yes.
Down there. Yeah.
All good. So we're going to get back into specimen. Does one of Michael and Angus have something they wish to share?
Angus?
No. So we can share the, I guess we can share the options we had in Confluence, which I have on the screen. No, I don't. I had them on my screen a second ago.
So we did pass a vote last time when you were swanning around an exotic part of the world that the two options were those first two. So they're all passed and we're good to go. So if you want to just revisit, but we're not re-voting.
Okay, so when I was away, so we voted, I take it, for these two. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, we didn't say the others are never, never. We just
No,
said
no.
the work we're going to focus on at the moment is get these right. We'll keep in mind that there will be other uses for specimen potentially, but these are the two that we're looking to put into the IG.
Okay. And okay, so we're firm on one. I was always a bit worried about whether one was. Okay. I'm a bit of a loss as I'm unprepared. So I guess, Michael, we've got the branch that you looked at, that you created. I've probably got a link to it somewhere. Showed that.
It's also in the chat.
So the question really for us is to look at these two use cases to discuss what data which is defined within the R4 specimen is relevant in terms of optional, required for the uses that we're looking to make of it, and then to, I guess, more generally talk about whether there is enough evidence for a common abstract base class, base profile to be used, or whether these are two quite distinct uses and don't have a common ancestor, those kinds of discussions.
Yep. And so I guess, so at the moment, I guess we're thinking option one is a completely different profile to option two, but could have a base that's the same. I guess option one clearly would, like option two, but one very key thing for specimen would be collection date. When was the specimen collected? And that's probably the standout difference between the two. Like one is, I have collected the specimen, here it is in my hand, therefore you have a collection date. But the other one is, I'm asking or suggesting someone should collect this specimen, therefore I would not have a collection date. That's, to me, on a surface level, these things are going to be very similar, except for that point. So,
and maybe identifier, because in a suggested specimen you won't have an identifier.
True. And I think even identifier is interesting, because even when you are collecting the specimen in the context of, it's like a doctor collect, the identifier is probably nothing quite very concrete, right? It's like 1, 2, 3. Like they're not going to rattle off the lab specimen identifier because they're not the lab. So I think whilst we probably will have identifier, it's a pretty, not a unique thing with a system, which I find interesting. Like I guess it could be, but really all a doctor wants to do is say 1, 2, 3. 1 is from the left swab, left hand, and 2 is from the right hand, and they're really just indexing those specimens with an identifier rather than it being a globally unique identifier, which I think is an interesting, at least that's my view. Unless the system, the DP system is going to spin out an identifier, ABC, blah, 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 which he's then going to write on the specimen, or the label's going to print out to put on the specimen, which is getting quite advanced or trickier. I don't know I don't know even if the identifier is the right property to put something like 1, 2, 3. I don't know if even people have views on how that would happen. What is the identifier when you're talking about a doctor collect? I think is an interesting point. So identify accession. We've got to also debate this split, which is troublesome. Status is probably pretty simple. So Michael has created a profile here. It's like first pass, and I'd be right in saying you've just put the must supports as per that page, I imagine. So you've just covered these, have you? I assume you just covered these. Yep.
Pretty much.
So status available.
Angus, when you're talking about identifier, you're talking about a container identifier. You're not talking about the identifier of the specimen.
I believe that's what we're talking about. Like, because doctors don't like there's the concept of an identifier on a specimen in a lab, which drives lab workflows within the lab, right? They really only get put on specimens either sometimes in collection centers or in the lab SRA, like when it hits the lab. They're rarely put on the specimen by the requesting doctor. And therefore, what is the identifier the requesting doctor has to put on the specimen? In my mind, just thinking through the way I understand the workflow, is really they're just trying to say that's specimen 1, this is specimen 2, and that's specimen 3, in order to correlate them to the request. Like specimen 1 is a left-hand swab, specimen 2 is a right-hand swab, or specimen 1 was a mole I cut off the left arm, and specimen 2 is the mole I cut off their foot. They're not trying to create necessarily a globally unique identifier like the lab would be creating for their processing in the lab. They're really just creating an index, really, to say that's 1, that's 2, that's 3. That's not to say you couldn't have the requesting system, medical directors, best practice of the world, spit out, a globally unique specimen identifier, but then the doctor would have to scribe it onto the sample or get a sticker printed out and put it on the sample. You could do that, but it's really only for the purpose that when it gets to the lab's collection center or the lab's SRA, that the human there understands that that specimen's for this and that specimen's for that. It's not driven, the lab's analyzers won't understand the number generated by best practice or medical director, right? So that's where I'm a little bit hazy on. I think we do need a number, an index, but do we use identifier for that? I mean, you could just have an identifier without a system, right? You could just have a value, which is like 2, 3, or 1. Anyway, I've toiled with that idea. Vince, yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
Okay. I mean, the specimen only has to be unique within the current order. So that's really what you're trying to identify within the specimen, because it's going to be associated at some stage with a specific order. And so it's going to be constrained by that order. So really, all you need for an ID is something that, as you say, the practitioner understands, that allows them to make that connection between what the specimen represents and the actual specimen. So it actually doesn't matter whether it's a number 1, 2, 3, 4, or it could be a set of alphanumeric.
Alphas. Yeah, it could be ABC.
But I mean, I wasn't clear that this ID is actually the ID of the specimen. Is that correct? Is the ID of the specimen? It's not the ID of the request?
Yeah, definitely. This is specimen identifier. So the idea of the request is back on service request down here. Okay. Service request group identifier. So here we have all these things. Requisition, it's called here, which is an identifier. So this is the group identifier, and then there's identifier here, which you could have like your placer order number and placer group number, right? Is really what these two are of the service request. But we're now talking, and then there's a linked specimen that goes to the specimen resource, which is exactly where we just were a second ago, and that has its own identifier, which is not the order identifier. It is literally the samples identifier. And if we were talking about inside the laboratory, that would definitely be a sample ID, that the lab has put on the tube. But when you're back in the doctor's office,
but it's not it's not the tube one, because that's the container identifier.
Yeah.
So my question is whether there is. I know what you said about I've got 2 of these things, and I think has been said, they're just got to be unique within this request. So you can certainly put a constraint in to say for a request, where you've got a list of specimens, their specimen dot identifier must be unique. You can probably do that, I think. But
look, oh, sorry. So look here. Like, sorry, I've just realized because you said container, I didn't think about that. So in specimen, we've been sort of debating the identifier here, but you're right, Andy, that a specimen container can have an identifier. It can also have a description, right? A textual description of the container. Like maybe we should be talking about these two, not.
Yeah.
Because this is the concept of a specimen can have multiple bits, right? And so one specimen, multiple containers, like it can do that too, which would obviously be all the same type. You know, you wouldn't be splitting different types of specimens, but you might have a histo with cut up into 3 bits, right? So there's 3 containers, and then so that's another layer, really. It's like.
But this is also saying that you can have multiple, obviously, containers per specimen. So you've got a blood drawer and you've got 5 containers of the blood. But I guess my question is, what's the use case for the identifier on the specimen as opposed to the container? So I call it, I call it 1, 2, 3 for the specimen, but then I've got A, B, C for the containers that those specimens are in. Like, is there any use for the 1, 2, 3? Because wouldn't it all be oriented around the container identifier? Because don't forget, these are well, they're labeled external identifiers for the specimen. And I don't know I'm trying to think of what the use case is for those identifiers.
Can Angus click on each of the identifiers and just dig into what it says about them?
So we'll start with the top one. So specimen identifier. So open up the link. Let me go to it. I have to find it. Here. So specimen identifier is a business identifier, not a resource identifier, obviously. Not much. So it really just says it's a business identifier. And then if we go to specimen container, that should end. Collection container. I'll have to go back. And if we go down to this one, container identifier. Click on it. ID for container. There may be multiple, a manufacturer barcode, lab assigned identifier, etc. The container ID may differ from the specimen ID in some circumstances. ID for container, a business identifier, not a resource identifier. Doesn't tell us much more than we kind of knew, does it?
I'm just on a fishing expedition here, but it's probably worthwhile looking at R5 just to get is anything different?
Yeah.
I mean, there's an implication there that, in fact, the specimen identifier and the container identifier are often the same. But they say that it may differ, but I think that in many use cases they will be the same.
Yeah,
so we need the sort of situation where I think they may be different is like typically with a CSF sample, you will take 3 containers of CSF, and depending on the order in which they've been drawn, you can do different things on them. The first one might have some blood in it because it's part of the initial tap, and the second one is usually the best one, and the third one may become concentrated. So that sort of situation, you've got the same specimen, identical specimen, same collection method, but you've got individual containers that need to be distinguished because you actually report on them differently. So that's the situation where I think that the specimen ID and the container ID would differ.
It's very interesting now. As Andy said, I've just gone to R5, and it certainly has our identifier, and it really doesn't say.
A little bit bigger, thanks, for the people with smaller screens and visually challenged. Thanks.
But this is specimen identifier. It really doesn't say anything new, an ID for the specimen. But interestingly, in R5, if I go down to container, there is no, they've taken it away.
Yeah, but what they're doing is replacing it with device. So the device is then seemingly
Resource
all the
file
information
is the container.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So then it'll have an identifier, won't it? It does. But identifier, unique instance identifier assigned to the device by the manufacturer or organizations or owners. Right. Right. So it's really no different, just structured.
Except it's got a lot more. It's going to have a lot more stuff that you can do. Not that.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be thinking of the very simplistic kind of, it's a container of blood, end of story. Whereas this thing could actually be
it's calling the sample.
It's
calling the sample a device and then defining a device. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be all sorts of exotic kind of things into the future.
So it's really this separation between the two identifiers is this one sample of one type for one test? Would that be right? So like I might do an MRSA, right? And I'm taking a swab from multiple places, all for MRSA. Now I've got like 5 swabs, but it's for one request, MRSA. And, you know, one swab's, I don't know exactly where they take them from, left nose, right nose, armpits, whatever, all over the body. And now I'm going to, you know, I could have an identifier say this is the bag of specimens for this MRSA, and then the containers will be like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the swabs I've taken. And then that's very different to me doing a request, one request for like an eye swab, and on the same form doing a request for a nose swab, and then them being, you know, you again, you're getting many swabs, but now they're broken apart for different requests, right?
And don't forget, you could share a specimen across multiple requests.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, there's no reason why the link is not to the same specimen. The 2 requests link to the same specimen.
We're struggling against the complex scenario, making the simple scenario, which is the more majority, complex. Because the 80% is like 1-to-1, like I've got an eye swab for my eye swab request. But
I think the bigger issue is whether, like, all of those would be allowed, and yes, the simple case would work, is there any reason that you would constrain the more complex cases at this point in time?
But it comes down to, in the simple case, which one are you going to use, right? Like, because in the complex case, you may use both with special meanings, but in the simple case, which one is it? Like when you've got one sample.
What are you talking about in the simple case? So simple case is I've got a request for a single test, and that test has a single sample and it's in a single container.
That's the simple one. Yep.
That's all fine.
So well, hang on. Is that, you say that's all fine? So where do I put my sample identifier? Sample what? Or are you saying I don't have one? Like sample 1? Like.
Well, this is my basic question. Even before we talk about complex, is why is there a need for a specimen identifier as opposed to a container identifier? Who's going to use it, and what are they going to use it for?
So your stupidly simple case is one test for like left hand wound swab, right? And then it's one sample, it's all one, right? Your next level up is I'm actually taking a left hand and a right hand, and I'm actually putting 2 orders, left hand swab, right hand swab, and they each have one sample, but now I have to differentiate between them. So I have to say, oh, that's 1 and that's 2, right? And that's like your medium complexity. Then you get your really complex, where you're getting like, you know, multiple samples for one request.
So when you say differentiate them, though, obviously they're going to come through as 2 referenced specimens from the they're going to be a reference specimen from 2 different requests.
Reference?
Right.
No,
Or for one request, 2 samples.
Yeah, I'm for the moment, I'm sort of sticking out of this world of like 2 requests for 1 sample. I'm not denying that's a thing, but I'm more thinking I've got 1 request, and the simple is 1 request with 1 test ordered, and it has 1 sample, right? That's the simplest thing you can do.
Yeah.
And then straight away is the next medium one, which is I've got 2 tests being ordered on the 1 request, and they both require an independent sample. So now I've got 2 samples, and I don't know which one's which. So I have to say 1, 2.
Right. So
and what happens when you have 2 samples for that 1 request?
That's the
often
complex one. Yeah, and that's the 3rd level. That's when it gets the most complex, where you've got one request, 1 test, which now has 5 samples associated with that 1 test. And then it gets even more complex if you have another test with 6 samples. You know, to me, there's almost 3 layers, right? There's like simple, 1 test, 1 sample, medium, 2 tests, each have a sample. And now you have to work out, well, which one's which. And then the really complex ones where you start getting multiple samples for multiple tests.
And I mean, part of the confusion here is you're not distinguishing adequately between a sample and a container. In that,
fair.
What some of what you're talking about is a request on a sample that's in multiple containers.
And to me, that's touching on this concept of accession number in my world, in my understanding. An accession number is an identifier over a group of things, right? And then the identifier is the ones within it. So I know a lot of people struggle with that separation. In radiology, an accession number is a group of images, and the slices are the images. And in pathology, an accession number is a taking of blood, like serum, but I took 5 serum tubes because I got lots of tests. So the accession is the group of 5 serum tubes, and the identifier is each tube.
So as Vince originally said, would you just replicate the container ID into the sample ID?
Mostly.
And then if you had a specimen with multiple containers, then you'd have to somehow make them unique.
Well, so if you've got more than one, you drop the specimen.identifier, now becomes not used, and the container identifiers.
Really?
Well, do you just always?
That'd be bad, because then you've got all these exceptional conditions.
So what if you just always? What if you never used? What if you just did not use this? You don't use this. You always use that. You always use container identifier. You got one, that's where it is. If you've got many, that's where it is. Do we need? And then, in my view, accession number is if you want an identifier for the group of samples, that's accession number. That's how I see the world, but I know it's controversial. I know a lot of people don't see the difference.
But that's 0 to 1.
Well, you may not have an accession identifier at the point where you're wanting to set up your specimen, because that's assigned by the laboratory. And if you're collecting this in a practice, you won't have an accession identifier.
Yes, very good point.
Yeah, okay. Assigned by a laboratory is not necessarily. This is not necessarily the same as the specimen, depending on the. Okay, so they're clearly saying it's assigned by the laboratory, but it's never going to be used in our case. In this case, we're discussing.
Well, it may be, but I don't think it's the commonest case by any means. So
in a dot collect, it's very unlikely to be used.
Yeah.
So I guess I just come back to this: is the identifier of the specimen is an external identifier. So it's not like you can't differentiate specimens, because you do have an internal fire ID. What you don't have is something independent of fire. But I think as being an external identifier, there needs to be a use case of, I need to talk about a specimen using and referencing this external identifier that is independent of the container in which the specimen is actually located. And the question is, who is going to use it, and for what purpose would they use it, so that they could identify that? I understand that. I can see the whole logic around the use of the container identifier. And this, I've got 5 containers, I lay them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or A, B, C, D, E. they're scoped relative to the specimen.
But
so you can't have multiple. You can't have the same. You can have the same container ID potentially. No, you probably couldn't, because they'd all be thrown into the same bag potentially.
So like sets of, aren't they? Sets of samples. You know, like the sample resource is not a single specimen; it's many of. So there's like a set identifier and an individual container identifier. But I imagine this often, in just a human workflow sense, they probably don't go to this difficulty, right? They just go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then on the request form they go, this is A, that is B, that is C, that is G, and they don't so much see the groups.
Well, there is no, there isn't a specimen in this case. It's more of a logical thing, because the only physical thing that they're dealing with is actually the containers.
I guess they all have to be the same type, right? So if as soon as one of your containers holds a different type of specimen, then it's a different specimen resource, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes,
All containers have to have the same specimen type.
Yeah.
So if you've taken 5 tubes of plasma, 5 tubes of serum, or you've taken 3 tubes of CSF, they're same specimen type but different containers, and you want to distinguish those containers potentially.
So what the R4 version of this allows you to do, doesn't allow you to do, is have a container that's actually referenced from multiple specimens, whereas the R5 one would allow you to say, I've got 2 different specimens and they are both within the same container.
And I think that's a very rare, I can't think of many use cases for that, can you? Where you're going to say, I've got 2 containers, but they're part of that, that specimen and this specimen. That's
no, it'd be one container of, and it's used for this specimen and used for that specimen.
Yeah, I can't see a case for that complexity.
Depends what you mean by a container. I mean, is the container the plastic bag that the specimens have all been put in, or is the container a pot, or is the container actually a vial of preserving fluid?
Yeah, I think it's not. I think
that's what R5 allows you to do, is to have, because you could say, because it's a device, I think there's a lot more flexibility in terms of the layering of containers.
Yeah.
Whereas you couldn't do that here in R4. It's kind of one-dimensional.
Yeah.
I worry that we're going to tie ourselves in knots with the complex case, right? Like we're going to make the simple case really complex because we're trying to cater for the complex case.
Why don't we take some actual examples from simple to complex and see which ones of them we want to support without it becoming too complicated.
See, the ones that come to mind for me is like so the 2 ones that come to mind beyond simple is histology, right? Like they've cut up lots of bits and they want to label them and tell you which one's which. They might take a mold from somewhere and then cut it into 3 bits and put it in 3 containers. Like there's that. I know that goes on a lot. And then the other one is just multiple swab taking, which can be which can be from like the MSRA example, where you sort of saying, I just want an MSA screen and here are 5 swabs, and it's sort of, so it is like many containers. I don't know if that would even be one specimen, would it? Because the type of material would be different, wouldn't it? Like, because one's from your ear, one's from your foot. Is that separate samples, or is that separate containers?
Yeah, I think
Can we go to the
crowd?
There's a few things in chat. So
Sorry. Yeah.
Chris Bedell's got some ideas. He's from Health. Maybe Rosemary. Does anybody else out there want to speak to this?
I'll
so
just touch on the. Sorry.
Go.
I'll just touch on the histo example. I believe that the sort of each site where you're taking a sample would be a separate specimen. So yeah, I don't know whether I know that when it's processed in histology and they do cut it up into pieces, I don't know that would be captured here being sort of in the requesting thing, or are we thinking sort of further on deeper in the sort of journey of the specimen that we would need that?
I think our scope is clearly, from our discussion, the decisions we just made earlier in earlier meetings, is the scope is we're pretty much in the doctor's office, right? So
yeah,
absolutely agree that when you get into the lab at the histo bench, they're cutting it up and putting it into further samples, but that's not our use case here. This is up front.
Yeah. Okay, and then all right, no problems here. So I guess there is, say, the prostate, for example, they do sort of sample it from different areas, and those need to be independent pots so that they can be identified as what quadrant in the prostate they've come from for that type of investigation. So I believe sort of sample is one thing. I think the container is the next level, and then I guess you got your tests, which you could have multiple tests off one container, and potentially where I guess it does get complicated too. You might need, say, double Luther and heparins, for example, because there's only got a particular volume, and then they would need to be identified as different containers, if that makes sense.
I really wonder whether at the front door where we're talking, whether it is as simple as we just need a specimen resource per container, and then the complexities in the lab, right? Them sorting them out. They just need to know what samples are related to what order items, and then the lab does their, the histo lab work. They just want to know which one correlates to what thing you're ordering, and then that further complexities in the lab. It's a bit bold thing to say, but I'm worried about pushing all this complexity up to the orderer.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very reasonable concern. Really, all the orderer is concerned wants to achieve is that the right test gets done, the right specimen,
right container. Yeah, and they just want to say this test here is for container A, B, and C, and that test there is for E, G, and F. And that's kind of as far as they want to go, right? Like, and then the lab further chops that up as required to do their processing.
Yeah, but there's also times when they don't know what test it is, right? So they'll just take the blood samples, which is what Chris was trying to say earlier, and expect the lab to be utilising them.
Oh, so where they're kind of like just hedging their bets. It's like, I don't exactly know, but if I take a heparin and a serum, I'm sure that'll cover this. And then they don't know which one's which,
Exactly right. Yeah.
But even that's not too problematic for us, because they could associate both samples with tests. Like you could put more than one sample on a test. You don't know. So you go, this liver functions test, it's a silly example. They go, there's a serum tube and a heparin tube. I don't know which one, but I'm sure you'll be able to work it out. But I don't think I think that's fairly easily achieved. Like we're not going to dictate to them what samples you must take for what tests. We're not going to that level. We're just trying to give them a mechanism to express to the lab, I took these samples for this test, and we're not going to, and we're not going to come down on them and say, oh, you idiot, you've taken the wrong sample, the wrong test. We just want them to communicate, I took these for these. I didn't take the blood for the urine test. I took the blood for that, wrongly or rightly, right? Like they could dissociate a blood to a urine test, and we might say that's very silly. Why did you do that? But at least they're able to tell us that I took this blood for this test.
I think has been said, I think it would be useful to get a set of just mainstream uses and go, we at least need to cover these. I'm not sure we want to necessarily restrict other uses at this stage because we don't necessarily want to count out those unless there were truly a very obvious duality of approaches that we thought could be taken. But because I don't want to, it would not be useful to go, there are two ways of representing this and then allow both. If it was completely obvious that there were these two ways, I think it'd be better to go with, as Vince said, just some real mainstream examples. So, there's blood taken in 3 tubes and there's 5 tests to be conducted across those 3 tubes. And what they look like, as you said, Angus, I did get a little confused when you talk about tests and requests. You've got the order, but in a fire sense, every test is a request, an independent request. So, we might have, 3 blood tests associated with the same sample, and that sample has 4 tubes. And we're not saying that you must do the first test with tube 1 and the second test with tube 2. They're saying that's your bucket. It just happens to be spread across 3 containers. So, but I think if we can get those examples and do the tests and then just a reference to one sample or shared samples, and then one container or multiple containers, we could probably kind of, I think, get down to a more concrete agreement.
Yeah, you certainly got the, I'm collecting lots of serum because I'm ordering lots of tests. And so, I'm collecting 3 tubes of serum. So just keep 1, 2, 3. And that's because I'm aware that I'm ordering like 20 serum tests roughly. And then, how are we going to structure that? Are we going to say, oh, that's one specimen with 3 tubes, and that one specimen is now associated to the 20 tests you ordered? And that's going to be
that's the example I want.
It's going to be difficult in the UI. Like that's going to be you're going to have to like spin up a sample, say it has 3 containers, and then associate that one sample to the 20 tests, right? And I don't know if that's what we want happening, right? Because they're really just going to want to say, I've got this test and I've got this sample for it. It's going to be difficult when they reuse the sample.
I don't think this is a UI issue for specimen. I think it's a UI issue for the containers, because I think that you've got a test and you want to associate it with a container, because ultimately you've taken 2 swabs and one was a left-hand swab and one was a right-hand swab, and you want to say, do this test on this swab and do this other one on that swab. How the specimen resource is used in the middle to link it all together, I don't think really you want the user to worry about any of that. I think we need to take care of that. But what I don't want to end up with is where we have a set of tests and that are basically given a reference to a set of samples and go, I've done some sampling with some specimens, figure out which ones you want to use.
But I think that's going to be very common, right? Because when the doctor takes couple of serum tubes and an EDTA tube, like a couple of blood tubes, and orders like 30 tests, he's not going to sit there and associate these serums and EDTAs with all the tests, right? He's just going to go, you know what I mean, do it, right? And it's only when he realizes that you won't know, like he says swab, and he's got 2 swabs, and he goes, oh, well, of course I have to tell you which one's which. That's the only time he's going to intervene and actually tell you, I have an eye swab, I have a left swab, and this, tell you which one. A lot of the time, even than that, he won't, right? He'll just go, there's 2 swabs, you'll work it out. There's no way he's going to itty-bitty join everything.
A lot of this comes down to what the terminology is that you use to order. You've got pre-coordinated terminology that specifies the specimen, then you don't have to worry about that. The system can deal with that. But if you're ordering a sodium and you've taken a urine and a blood sample, then you need to say which of those you want the sodium done on. There's no way of getting away from that. So there does need to be at some stage, and for some of the specific tests, an ability to be able to assign a request for a test to a specimen.
I agree, and I don't think it's going to be us that drives when that happens and when it doesn't happen.
No.
It's the intelligence of the order going. Of course, I have to tell you.
Yeah, and if we take a glucose as an example, I mean there are specific low encodes for glucose on urine and glucose on serum. I think also glucose on plasma and glucose on fluoride tube. So they're distinguished by the terminology that you use, and you don't have to go through that allocation of what specimen do you want to do the glucose on. But that's going to need to get sorted out in the UI. I don't think we really need to go there.
Yeah, I think that's correct, because if we take the SPEAR requesting set as the kind of base, I believe it does separate out the different uses of a glucose test. It doesn't say generic glucose, and then you've got to manually link them all together. Can I get Angus, maybe Vince, to just come up with like 3 or 4, however many you think are relevant, just examples, and we can then kind of create that, what is the recommended use of specimen and container. I think the original question is really, and I'm still maybe not really clear on it, is identifier. And I can kind of see it. It's very obvious to me, container identifiers. I can see that as being really useful, and as an external one, because it's a label, but what I don't understand is an external identifier for the specimen and what it would actually be used for. But if we can work through, I don't know, some examples next time we meet, I think we can kind of don't get bogged down in the exotics of everything you could potentially do if you wanted to. But if we can just carve off the real ones and then leave it up to implementation experience to start asking the hard questions.
We'll apply the 80-20 rule.
Yes, 70-30, whichever one you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. If we do the 80-20 rule, then it's just all blood samples.
Depends on your lab type, doesn't it? Anyway.
It does.
Michael Osborne, were there any other, if we kind of go, we've had a bit of a discussion, I think, around identifiers at least, were there other key things that we should be talking about? Or Angus?
Well,
the one thing I missed out of this profile was who collected it. I mustn't have seen that. So that's, I think, pretty important, like for traceability.
Yeah, to at least distinguish patient collection versus practice.
Well,
kind of.
That's actually another question too, because if you go to the snapshot, patient's not one of the collector types. It's not referenced in there.
So container was collector, processing, collection, collector. Oh yeah, it's not patient. It's a bit weird.
Is that an R4?
This is R4. Here's your R5. Specimen.
Anyone want to bet that patient's now in there?
Yeah, probably. Specimen. Features, collection, collector, patient. Yeah. So, what does that mean? We have to extend. We have to do extension to do it.
Yeah. I think it's necessary though.
I agree.
Yeah.
Is the other area that we need to do some work on is specimen types. So Michael and I are going to try and put together different. So SPEAR has recently provided a list of specimen types that they think are reasonable. That's different from the HL7 specimen type table, and HL7's got two different specimen type tables, one for 2.4 and one for 2.6 and higher, which disambiguates specimen from collection method. So there's a little bit of work to do there around specimen type.
I might have missed the earlier one, Vince. I'm just trying to find the PowerPoint I had, where we broke down, like we broke down in the specimen here. You've got collection, you've got processing, you've got container, you've got additives, and we broke them all down because there's a lot there. But again, it's the complexity problem. But I agree. I think we've got a lot of work to do on type, like, it's a value set of types, and yeah, the one in V2 is a bit lackluster.
Well, and it also mixes collection method and actual type. So
yeah,
Is there's no binding for type
in what? In which
in fire,
in fire?
in R4?
We inherit the AU-based specimen binding, which is to the NCTS specimen types, which needs updating. We're aware of that. It doesn't contain, it's missing a bunch of things. Yeah.
And I think it also has some confusion about collection method as well from a couple of things, and with that, you've updated it. So yeah, I think good for us to do some work on that.
Okay, so we got two things to look at. One of them being some concrete examples, and second one being to investigate type and a way forward, comparing what the existing, as you say, Vince, V2 approaches are, and the NCTS mapping or binding that base uses.
this is. I wanted to just bring this slide up. Like we talked about this earlier, but there's all these, like, these are the things that are in the fire resource which we need to go over and decide what are we doing, right? There's body site, there's collection method stuff, there's specimen type, container type, additive types, procedure and processing. So the fire resource really carves it up into those 6 elements. I'm not suggesting we have to use all of them, but we probably do need to go over each and go, which are we using? And maybe, Vince, that's what you're talking about, where maybe V2 was joining some of these together where it shouldn't have.
Exactly, yeah. I think Fire's learned from that process, and
Is though the two use cases, kind of in terms of intended collection and actual practice collection, patient collection, this is obviously a range of features that are for all specimen users, but if we're constraining that, of course, we don't want to have users being unnecessarily burdened with a whole bunch of additional information that is not required for the use cases that they're dealing with.
Yeah,
how do we, and can they be defaulted for that, or do we just leave them out?
Absolutely. I mean, this slide wasn't up to say that we must make them collect all these things. It was more to say these are all the possible things you can connect, and I 100% don't believe we're going to be asking for all of them, but we need to prosecute each and say, are we going to ask for container additive? Probably not, right? Because the container itself tells you the additive in it, and it's probably going too far to ask the doctor what's the additive in the container. But we need to prosecute it and go make that clear decision, not just skim over it, right?
I think it's important to have the option, but not to prescribe it. Because I guess it all depends on the use case. And if they just want the test, for example, then hopefully that would maybe backwards populate all the other ones, or select a few of those depending on the test to help them, I guess, pinpoint what it is. Or if they've just, I've got this entity that's at a particular site of a patient, this is what I'm going to put in. Here's maybe a list of tests that might be like recommended. So it all depends on like the UI, but I think having it there as an option is important.
And that's absolutely the decisions. We see these red flags here. That's absolutely decisions we're to make. So we're never taking anything away. Like, so we're never saying, you know, wherever additive is here, additive. We're not saying you can't put an additive in a resource. The hard thing we have to do is decide where we're putting these red flags, because these red flags are saying you must support this. Like, the minimum you must do is consider this. It doesn't mean you have to have it. Like, it can be optional, but you can't ignore addressing it. And that's what the red flag's doing. Whereas additive down here, we're saying you can put an additive in, but it's not the minimum required. You don't even need to consider where you would do that. But if you want to put one in, you can. And that's the hard choice we have to make. It's the balance between what do we absolutely want the implementers to consider and must do. Doesn't mean you must have it, but you must consider it, as opposed to everything else, which you could put it there, but there's no expectation that you will put it there, and there's no expectation that the receiving system's going to address it if you do put it there. These red flags are what says you must consider whether you're going to put this in the resource, and the receiver must address it being there if it's there, as opposed to this, which just says, you can put it there, but don't expect anyone to do anything with it. And that's the hard decisions we have to make, is to your point, and to that slide, you know, there's all these things, but are we going to say additive is must support? People must consider this, or is it just, you know, in a closed system you can use it, but don't expect anyone on the standard to really address that you've done it. It's the balancing act.
I just want to add to that we can actually adjust the cardinality of those things, and that's what I've done in this particular profile. I've said that you must have a subject, that's mandatory, and you must have a specimen type. So that's above what AU base has said. So I think they're kind of natural things to have there. Like, why would you put a specimen on there without a specimen type? So just pointing that out.
I noticed you didn't constrain status.
So this is really the base, super base. First, let's just throw mud at this thing. So that's probably something else we might want to do from a requesting perspective, because you wouldn't be putting unsatisfactory on a requested. Obviously, I've just taken this specimen and it's unsatisfactory. No, you're not going to do that. You're probably going to say it's available. You might want to constrain it to available. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't, in the use cases we're looking at, I don't really see the other three of having a role. And then if we're saying it's always available, then at this profile, I don't even know if you would even use status. I mean, you could fix it on available, but given you can't have an unavailable specimen.
Well, what about our option one, where we're suggesting a sample? Like, that's option one worries me about how we model that, right? When we've got a sample, fine, I agree with you, but option one was like, I'm suggesting you collect an eye swab, and therefore it's not available. It's unavailable. I don't even know what it is, right? It's like the suggestion. It's only.
Well, that's where I think we need to, for suggested sample, I think we should look at bringing in the R5 approach, because I don't think you can just link a specimen resource into the request and somehow differentiate it as being, suggested rather than.
Well, I agree. The links go
structure.
The other way, like that we've got the links from service request or from specimen, which clearly document that difference, but it's not very obvious. And then I would have thought the suggestion is going to be unavailable, isn't it? Where the other one is going to be available. Like,
Well, you also may end up with an unsatisfactory specimen if the patient's come in, had their blood collected and gone to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Is it, are you fasting?" And the patient says, "Oh, no, I'm not." And this is supposed to be a fasting specimen. So you might still process that because you've got other tests that can be done on a non-fasting specimen, but for that particular specimen would be unsatisfactory.
But if the doctor's going to go forward, then how can he say it's unsatisfactory? Like to say, I want this done unsatisfactorily, isn't that a bit?
It's unsatisfactory for some of the tests, but not for the others. So I mean, for the sodium, potassium, and liver function tests, it's fine, but for the lipid profile, it's not.
And what's the lab meant to do in response to that? Send it back to him and say, "We'll get a satisfactory sample then."
Yeah, not run the lipid profile. I mean, how you would know that, I don't know, but that's because we don't actually have a way of transmitting that information. So.
I kind of feel like if you're going to send it unsatisfactory, then that's your problem. Like, go get a satisfactory one. Like, don't.
Yeah. And that is usually what happens. That's true.
So you brought up suggested specimen. If you go to the service request profile, there's actually a couple of options we've got here.
Sorry, Michael, here you are.
Okay, so in the extensions, are you on the? No, you're not on the branch.
Oh, sorry, the branch. Yeah. Sorry, I know what you mean. Is there a link here? Here. Let's go to your one. Is that the right place?
That's
no.
not
You're in
No. Yeah, I'm trying to work it. Yep, and I'll have to go. I
didn't want to spend a lot of time on this. There might be other things, but essentially the choice is in the extension you can have a codable concept, which is the specimen type, or you can actually have a reference to a specimen. And so I guess the choice is, do we want just like the doctor to say, I'm recommending this type of specimen, or do we want other elements in there, in which case we'd need an actual specimen profile for this?
Oh, so the specimen extension doesn't use the sample resource, does it?
It uses both.
Specimen.
It uses both. So you can have a codable concept in there, or you can have a reference to a specimen.
Right, I didn't realize this. So this is your codable concept. Where's the specimen reference?
I think I've actually zeroed it out in this one.
Right, you've sort of, okay.
I made a choice.
Yeah, I understand.
So because I had to make a choice. So it's just to show you that this is the extension, and we can do either of these things. If we decide that type's enough, we can do a code. If it's not, then you'd have to code to a reference to a specimen.
This is a code for what, Michael?
A specimen type.
Code? A specimen type. Okay.
Yeah. Type. So you're not at. So all you're really saying is, like, and then specimen type. So it's gonna be like swab, like not eye swab, like body site and things like that.
I think what we need to do is actually go back through those must support elements in the context of suggested specimen and decide which ones you can't have. Like, you can't have collection date and time. You can't have who collected it. You can't have method. There's all this stuff.
I feel like we probably have to prosecute the first one, the actual I have a specimen, and then come back on suggested. Because once we know our answers for when I have a specimen, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to work out. And when I am suggesting one, I've got this concrete base of the more complex when I have one. I think maybe doing this in two passes, doing the I have a specimen profile, and then coming back round and doing I'm suggesting one, and we can work out what we need to nitpick from what we've created already, right? Whereas if we start with the other one, we're just going to get ourselves into a dead end when we do the more complex one.
I think we also should focus on, again, concrete, realistic examples for suggested specimen, because clearly you're not saying, you know, I want an LFT, I suggest, you know, you take serum to do this. Like, that's not really the use of it. But there's obviously a couple of suggested specimen use cases that would make sense. But I don't know what they are. You guys would. And I think those are the ones we need to cover off. Obviously, things like I need you to take a wound swab, for instance, of the left hand. I can see all those. If you're not doing it in the practice, maybe, I don't know. But I just wonder what the range of guidance, because it's not the same detail as in this is what I've collected.
Sadly, I missed you making the voting, and I don't want to go back to the voting, but I'm a little bit sore that we voted on one, and like two, absolutely, but one, I struggled a little bit with the use cases. Like, it's a thing, but what are the use cases? And Vince, I don't know if you like, what do you feel is a case where a doctor's suggesting a specimen as opposed to collecting it? Like do they really say, left hand wound swab, please collect that for me, lab, in your collection centre? Does that happen?
No, not generally. I mean, I'm not clear about the suggestion. You know, who is making the suggestion, and to whom. So that particular scenario, I think we need to be clearer about what the context of its use is.
I sort of had it there because I know your comment earlier about the catalogue not being specific about sample types, right? So someone could order a swab and then everyone would be like, well, what do you want, right? But the reality is when they order swab, they usually take the swab, do they? Except maybe, you know, gynecological stuff, like they might, but then do you need to say what type it is? Usually those types of swabs would the ordered test would say, you know, it's a vag swab or something. So I mean, I am too vague on option one when it's what its real use case is. Like, it's a conceptually an idea, but
part of it, I think also we think about is not necessarily the soup to nuts of the specimen specification. It may simply be one attribute that we actually don't have any other way of capturing it structurally in the request, and so the only logical place, and body site's the one that, you know, kind of makes sense. If there is a code for something that isn't specific enough, we need to portray the body site, and the place to put it is the suggested specimen, but it's not there to say, you know, all of the other attributes of the specimen. It just wanted to get across that one piece of information, which would otherwise have just fallen into clinical notes, and it would have been there as part of a broader piece of text. So, you know, that was the logic.
So because of these concerns, I think we should be really focused on option two. I'm not throwing out option one immediately. I'm just raising my concerns. But I think if we do our work, if we do our work on option two, because we've got a lot to do there, and then when we get to the end of option two and we're pretty satisfied with what that is, now we prosecute option one, and then maybe we're re-prosecuting whether we even need it. But we'll have all the work we've done on option two to select what we may or may not need for option one, and maybe we even drop option one. But I kind of don't want to spend a lot of time on option one hampering our work that we really need to do on option two. I feel like 80% of what we're trying to do here is option two, right? Like, and so let's not burn lots of time.
I think you're
until the end.
I think your guidance was completely appropriate, that we focus on option two and we get that kind of bedded down with the requirement, and then we'll be in a much better position to go. And in option one, where are those use cases, and we'll drive it through that. If it turns out that no one can think of a use case for any suggestions, then we can always go step back from that, and we can take a vote and go, you know,
Yeah.
we just need to kind of go through the formal process of rescinding the vote we kind of made before. But let's not worry about that today. Let's do the concrete bit first.
Yep. All right. Shall we move on? Did you have stuff to cover, Andy? And so our actions here is like, I'm going to work maybe with Vince to try and think up some common 80% use cases for the different variation of containers and tests.
Yeah, just like test, and then one or more tests, and then what you see potentially is well, even if you leave out specimen for the minute and just have container relationship, just from like a user perspective.
Vince, I might share with you in an email, like we'll start with tests, like this test, that test, this test. What do we think are the right tests to do? And then once we've agreed on the test, then we can start drilling it out. What does that mean for samples? Like,
Sure.
And was there another action? It was that.
Yeah, Vince. The other one was on type. Specimen type.
I'm going to work with Michael on type.
Okay.
You don't have to solve it, but at least maybe next time that we can kind of have a bit of a discussion around our way forward and what you found out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. Have we left you any time to talk about your stuff?
Look, I'll just give some updates because I think once we kind of dig into transfer, that is going to be a bigger discussion. But are there any other, just before I jump into something else, is there any further things anyone else would like to raise around this? I think obviously specimen is something new for us, so slotting it in isn't necessarily a easy and obvious way of doing it, even though we do have lots of use cases for some of the stuff. So yeah, just yell out or raise your hand if you've got anything else that you would like to talk about before I just do one or two more things.
There are comments like aliquots. So aliquots are very much in the lab where they take one of these samples and chop it up into many other tubes, which is kind of out of our scope. Different test orders for one specimen, histology plus molecular testing. I think we've prosecuted a lot of that. Janie said NPAC own definition of specimen that needs to be taken into account. Do they have a definition of a specimen? I'll have to go. I'll take on that to try and.
They don't. They defer to SPEAR for specimen, and SPEAR does have a list of specimens.
Yeah. So the V2 spec is really what NPAC's pointing at.
Well, SPEAR's not just V2. SPEAR's fire and V2, but yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The SPEAR advice that the college gives. Yep. I understand. Nick Ferris, in hospitals, house officers often refer patients to the pathology department for less invasive specimen gathering, skin biopsies, swabs, etc. Analogous to sending patients to the lab for. So he's saying in a hospital, and I guess most of our stuff is community-based, but in a hospital, they'll send the patient down to the lab to get that difficult sample that they'd rather not take themselves. And I guess that's our suggested thing, right? Like we're kind of questioning, does that happen in community health? Does the doctor go, I don't know if I can take that sample, but maybe the lab could? And I think that's our open question that we need to drill into further.
That happens a lot for STD collection as well.
Yeah, yep. MRSA is a good use case, someone said. That's what I can just see in comments skimming over them.
Okay, and everyone, you're all good with that in terms of guidance around the examples? Angus?
You asking me? Yeah.
Yes. As long as,
No, I don't want to do it now.
No.
Yes.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was just going, you've digested that and you can move forward. Okay. The only other thing I wanted to briefly mention was that last week, Michael Osborne gave me some feedback on the bundling to say that the IG should constrain the the operations in the bundle to put and post, which I have added a constraint into the IG. I just have to push that up into the branch, and then we will look to take that into our continuous development branch, which basically reflects the agreed decisions we've made. Just to note that that doesn't mean this is guaranteed to go into R2 and this is exactly how we're going to do it. It then becomes, as our continuous development branch, the candidate for things like connectathons and others, that we can then begin to try those things out and figure out whether they meet the need. And it will be the way we collect the ongoing work we do and agreements we make going forward. So at some point, when we get to some agreement around specimen, we'll put that into the continuous development branch when we have agreed that that branch does reflect the approach we wanted to take. And then when we get to ballot, that continuous development branch will become the foundation of the ballot, and we'll be able to then take it through the ballot process, and you all can completely complain about everything we've already done, and we can rescind it all and saying we should never have done that. It was I don't know what we were thinking, but so it is. I just wanted to say that these are not done deals. They just happen to be the representation of the ongoing agreements we make through this process. Hopefully that's all good with everyone. So we might wrap it up now rather than leap off into the great unwashed area of claiming, but I do promise that we will do it next time. Vince.
If I could just put something on the agenda, I mean, I assume everyone's aware that last week NPAC published an updated set of requirements for laboratories that included fire. Unfortunately, because they didn't really put those two things together very well, there's now a requirement for people using fire orders to have specimens that are taken from SPEAR. We're working on that, but also to be able to do transport and application level acknowledgement. And I think some guidance as to what exactly that means in the fire context would be helpful.
Yep, we can have a discussion about that, because I think that does fit within the work that we have done. It's just I think a translation and an agreement around maybe how we can talk about that that everyone understands. So yes, yeah. Good point. So definitely, David, happens. Can you note that for next time? Excellent. Thanks, Vince.
Vince, so my comment on those that I read that update is to me, I read that as saying labs can use fire core to do resulting, and that's what it says. Like, it doesn't actually. It says you can use fire AU core and AU eRequesting, and then that implies, given the specs about resulting and ordering, that implies, I can use AU core for resulting, which I feels like a leap far too early.
Well, exactly. There's a number of areas that, yes, reading through it, because of the alignment between what was really V2 stuff and the fire stuff hadn't really been thought through, I don't think, or not sufficiently integrated, shall we say, to be kind.
I think they just need to remove the reference to AU core, because AU eRequesting is based off AU core, so it's inherently, and then all you're saying to them is you can use AU eRequesting fire. We're not insinuating you can use core to do resulting, which to me that's what it reads like now.
Well, that's one anomaly, but the other requirements that you have to use SPEAR specimens, that you have to use transport level acknowledgements, etc., which are all hangovers from the V2 stuff, but it's not specified as specifically only V2.
Understand. Yep.
Anyone else have any last minute comments they'd like to add to the conversation? Nope. Well, I do thank you all for coming along today It's been a really interesting conversation about an area that we're going to, I think, do some good work in. So thank you very much. We will see you in 2 weeks' time. If you do have anything between now and then that you want to question or add to an agenda that's interested, then drop it off and the co-chairs will add that to the agenda and move it along. Thank you,
Andy,
everyone.
much appreciated. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
bye.
David.
Bye.
Thanks.
That's all.
Bye.
Thanks.